My parents disappear every October 31st. I don't mean they'd leave for a party or a night out. No, they'd vanish gone without a trace by sunset, leaving me alone in the house. I'd search for them, call their names, but they were always gone, like they'd never existed. It wasn't something we ever talked about. The next morning they'd be back, acting as if nothing had happened, like it was just another night. But it wasn't. I knew that. I learned it the hard way. It all started when I was 6 years old. I remember that first Halloween like it was yesterday. I was dressed as a witch, excited to go trick-or-treating. But just as the sun dipped below the horizon, I noticed the house felt different, cold, quiet, too quiet. I ran through the halls, calling for my mom and dad, but no one answered. Panic set in. I thought maybe they were hiding, playing a prank, but after what felt like hours of searching, I realized they were gone. The front door was locked, the windows were shut, and I was completely alone. That's when I found the first note. It was on the kitchen table, written in my mom's familiar handwriting. It simply said, "Rule 1, stay in your room. Do not come out until sunrise. Whatever you hear, ignore it." I didn't understand then. I was scared, confused, and alone. I didn't want to stay in my room. I wanted to find my parents. But something about the note made me follow the instructions. I thought maybe it was some kind of weird game. I wasn't sure. That night I didn't sleep much. The house creaked and groaned, more than usual. I heard strange noises, soft scratching at my door, footsteps in the hallway, whispers that I couldn't quite make out. I told myself it was the wind or my imagination, but deep down, something was in the house with me. The next morning, when I opened my door, my parents were back. They were sitting at the kitchen table, sipping coffee like nothing had happened. I asked them where they'd gone. That was the beginning. Ease. Every Halloween after that was the same. My parents would disappear just before nightfall, leaving me alone with a note. Each year, the instructions got a little more specific, a little more ominous. By the time I was 8, the notes included things like, "Rule 2, don't look out the windows," and Rule 3, don't respond if someone calls your name. And the noises, they got worse. One year when I was 9, the sounds outside my room became unbearable. There were knocks on the door, not gentle, but loud, insistent pounding. I pressed my hands over my ears, squeezing my eyes shut, but I couldn't block it out. The voice on the other side was familiar, my mother's voice, calling my name. "Ellie, it's okay. You can come out now." She sounded so calm, so normal. For a second, I almost believed it was really her. But the rule had been clear: do not open the door, no matter what you hear. So I didn't. I stayed under the covers, trembling, until the knocking stopped. I never told my parents about the voice, and they never asked. The years passed, and the game continued. It became a twisted Halloween tradition. While other kids dressed up and collected candy, I stayed locked in my room, listening to the house come alive with things I couldn't see. I became used to the notes, the strange noises, and the feeling of being watched. It was all part of the game, my own haunted ritual. But when I turned 13, everything changed. That year, the note was different. I found it on my bed just as the sun was setting, but instead of the usual instructions, Rule 4, there's something new in the house tonight. Be careful. I didn't know what that meant, but the moment I read it, I felt a chill run down my spine. Something new? What did that mean? I locked my door as usual and tried to settle in for the night, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The noises started earlier than usual. At first, it was the familiar creaks and footsteps. I'd gotten used to those. But then, there was something else breathing. I could hear it, low and heavy, just outside my door. It wasn't human. It was too slow, too deep. I pressed myself against the headboard, clutching my flashlight like a weapon, even though I knew it wouldn't help. The breathing moved away after a while, but then came the scratching. It wasn't at my door this time, it was coming from inside my room. I whipped the flashlight around, scanning the walls, the ceiling, but there was nothing. The scratching grew louder, closer, until it felt like it was coming from beneath my bed. My heart pounded in my chest, my throat dry with fear. I didn't dare look under the bed. I was too scared of what I might find. The scratching stopped abruptly, replaced by a soft, childlike giggle. The sound of it froze the blood in my veins. It wasn't me. It wasn't my parents. I backed up against the wall, holding the flashlight out in front of me like it could protect me from whatever was there. The giggling continued, soft and mocking. I whispered to myself, "It's not real. It's just a game," but I didn't believe it anymore. Suddenly, there was a loud bang on the door. The whole room seemed to shake with the force of it. I dropped the flashlight, plunging myself into darkness. The breathing was back, but this time it was right outside my door. Bang. Another hit. The door shuddered. Bang. The lock rattled. Whatever was out there was trying to get in. I scrambled to pick up the flashlight, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. The banging grew more violent, each hit sounding like the door was about to give in. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Silence. Pure, deafening silence. I held my breath, waiting, listening for any sign of movement. Then, the voice returned, soft and sweet, like honey. "Ellie, it's okay. You can come out now." It was my mother's voice again. But this time, I knew it wasn't her. I didn't answer. I didn't move. I just sat there, frozen in fear, praying for the night to end. The voice called out again, more insistent this time. "Ellie, don't be scared. It's just a game." My hands were trembling, and I could barely hold onto the flashlight. The voice kept calling, but I stayed silent. I knew the rules. I knew I couldn't open the door. But then, something strange happened. The door. It began to unlock. I heard the soft click of the lock turning, and the handle slowly twisted. "No," I whispered, pressing myself further against the wall, willing the door to stay shut. But it was too late. The door creaked open. Just a crack, but enough for me to see a shadow in the hallway, something tall and thin, its limbs too long, its fingers clawed. It wasn't my mother. The creature stood in the doorway, unmoving, watching me. I could feel its eyes on me, even though I couldn't see its face. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I felt like I might pass out. And then, just as it stepped forward, the first rays of sunlight crept through the window. The creature recoiled, hissing like an animal, and within seconds, it was gone. I didn't leave my room until the sun was fully up. When I finally opened the door, the house was just as it had been the night before, silent, empty, as if nothing had happened. My parents were back, sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee like they always did. I stumbled in, shaken and pale, and told them everything: the creature, the scratching, the voice that wasn't my mother's. They just looked at me, exchanged glances, and then my dad laughed softly. "You must have had a bad dream," he said, shaking his head. "Nothing like that happened, Ellie. It was just your imagination." My mom smiled that same strange smile and added, "You're safe now. It's over." But I knew better. I knew it wasn't just a dream. The fear, the things I'd heard and seen, they were real. They had to be. My parents didn't believe me. They never did, and that was the most terrifying part. Now, as an adult with children of my own, I know the truth. Whatever haunted me in that house, whatever played that sick game, it's still out there, waiting. And it's hungry. I fear for the lives of my children. I'll never let them go through what I went through. I'll protect them at all costs, even if it means never celebrating Halloween, never letting the night touch them the way it touched me. Because I know, deep down, that it's only a matter of time before the game starts again. Halloween is coming.
My name is William Anderson, and it is with a sound mind that I can say, despite what the doctors think, that I am not insane. I guess I should explain more for you to understand. Like stated, my name is William Anderson. I was born December 7th, 1990. I went to college and finished with a Bachelor of Science in Nursing. The idea of being a doctor never really clicked with me, but I still wanted to work in that kind of environment, so nursing was the next step down. I got a job not long after college at the local urgent care, and that's where I worked for about 11 years, until recently. What you're about to read is my best recollection of the events that transpired over the past 2 months, and I hope that when you're done, you will agree with my statement from before. I'm not insane. The urgent care I worked in didn't really get a lot of people in there regularly. The town I live in is pretty small, so most of the time it was usually the same few that came in. Older patients and the occasional visit from parents after their kid gets a sprain or breaks something. It was a very rare occurrence to ever get someone we didn't know in the place. Mostly, it was truckers riding by that didn't fill up to par, the road trippers that needed directions, and then there was him. It was about 1 a.m. when he came in. I was putting some patient information in the computer when a man came up to the desk. The best way I could describe him was that he looked boring. I don't mean that in a rude way. I mean, he looked like the most basic man you can think of. If you were to think of a man off the top of your head, you would probably imagine a guy that looked like him. Brown hair, brown eyes, he didn't have a single noticeable thing about him. He was average height, maybe 50 years old. I say maybe because I never got the chance to ask him. Almost immediately after he walked up to the desk, he fell over, and immediately after he fell over, he started to convulse. I quickly got over to him and called for someone to help me stabilize him and for someone else to call 911. At urgent care, we treated non-life-threatening illnesses, so when someone starts to convulse and turn blue in the middle of the lobby, we weren't really accommodated for treat that. It was 1:19 a.m. when the ambulance showed up, but it was too late. He had died about 6 minutes before they came. Luckily for us, the lobby was empty when this all happened. Unluckily for us, we all had to experience it. The best way I would describe the feeling of the place afterwards would be stagnant, like the air in the building was staying still for us to really sink in what happened. We tried to carry on like normal after everything transpired. A few of the younger workers left early because of it, while I stayed the rest of my shift to fill out all the needed forms to document what happened. Although it's not normal for something like that to happen, it's also not impossible for someone to die in urgent care. I figured that I just got the short stick in life and was one of the unfortunate few to experience such a thing, but that life would move on like normal afterwards. I was wrong. It wasn't until 4 days after that I started to notice little things. I would feel like someone was watching me from corners or that I was being followed when walking on the street. I caught myself a few times rounding a corner and almost waiting for something to just pop out from behind the wall, ready to strike me down. I chalked it up to nerves, but it really started to freak me out when I would experience it at home. I live in a pretty decent area of town, in a quiet neighborhood, so it really was strange when I would feel like someone was trying to peek into my windows and catch a glimpse of me. This feeling of unease kept up for about a week until the climax of it finally came to turn one night. It was about 1 a.m. when it happened, almost 15 days after the stranger had died at my work. I had taken a few days off for some personal issues, so I was being a responsible adult and staying up past my normal bedtime. I was sitting in the living room on my phone while some show I had put on played on the TV when I heard something. I had thought the sound came from the show, but then I heard it again, this time louder and more distinct. I muted the TV and waited for it to happen again, and when it did, it sounded almost like glass being knocked on. My first instinct was to check the front windows, but as I was making my way to them, I heard it again, this time behind me. I turned to look at the kitchen window when I saw something pass by it outside. Unfortunately, the light of the living room glared on the window, so all I could see was a black blur. So like an idiot, I turned them off, trying to get my eyes to adjust to the moonlight that started to shine in from outside. I had hoped it would make it easier to see out the windows and maybe catch who was doing this. I almost immediately regretted my decision cause as soon as I could see out of them, I noticed a figure pressing their face against my back door. I almost jumped out of my skin and let out what I believed to be the loudest scream I have ever made. I just stood in my living room as still as I could, staring at the figure. They had their hands over their eyes as to see better inside, which just made the image more frightening. Their body was hunched over and I could see them adjusting their position as to get a better view. I just stood still and slowly tried to get my phone from the couch's armrest, and as I was about to grab it, that's when I noticed it. They were staring right at me. Their arms were at their sides and their forehead was pressed right against the glass. I could feel their gaze peering directly into me as I just stared right back at them. Without wasting any more time, I grabbed my phone and ran to the front door. I could hear the handle of the back door shaking as the figure started to bang on it. I was running out of the house as I heard the door's glass frame shatter. I didn't bother to look. I just slammed the door behind me and ran to my neighbors. I was lucky enough for them to be home and was able to have them call the police for me as I had become an incoherent mess. The police checked my whole house and, besides the broken back door, they said they could find no signs that another person was ever in my house. Did they think it just smashed the door and walked away? I told them I heard it come towards me after it broke in, but they said it wasn't enough evidence to push it any further. I ended up staying with a friend for a while after cause I just knew something was wrong. No one just goes to a person's back door to break it and leave. I soon found out that my suspicions were right. I was still being watched. I could feel eyes on me at almost every second of the day, but it wasn't the normal side glances people give you on the street. No, this was a hateful stare coming from one specific person. I would start to freak out at the smallest things. People bumping into me, the sound of things falling, but it all started to come to a head one day at work. It had been about 20 days since the stranger had died at my work. The image of him falling over in front of me would reply in my head every time someone came up to check in. I ended up moving to the back and just did some busy work cause it was getting too much for me. I was filling out some checklists for supplies when it hit me. I was being watched. And I did about 5 360s to check around me, just spinning in a circle to try and catch a glimpse of anyone that might have been there. I grabbed a nearby wall to catch my balance when I finally spotted them. Standing right in the middle of the hallway was him. He almost looked like a shadow draped in darkness, so I couldn't see any noticeable things about him. I think we stood like that for about 10 minutes before he finally took a step towards me. I didn't waste any time. I turned and ran the other way. I was praying, pleading for someone else to show up and help me, but no one did. It was as if the entire building was empty. The hallways felt like they were stretching. What should have been a 20-second walk to another room had turned into a 5-mile sprint. Every time I turned around, he was right there, just staring at me. After what felt like miles, I finally reached a room. I slammed the door behind me and backed away, staring at the knob of it. I looked for anything to use in the room to defend myself when I heard the doorknob shaking. I started to hyperventilate, my head spinning as I watched it shake more and more violently. I slowly moved into a corner and slid down, staring at the door. As the door slammed open, I just started to scream, "Get the fuck away. Get away? I don't know what you want from me." I felt a pair of hands grab my arms and start to squeeze them before a calm voice filled my ears. "William, calm down. It's okay. No one is here." I opened my eyes to one of my coworkers right in front of me, the rest of them standing by the door terrified. I felt my eyes fill with tears as I clung onto them, feeling myself break down. I didn't know what was happening. I wasn't even sure if it was real, but I know that it wasn't safe for me to be around people while I was like this. I went to my boss and told him I was quitting. He knew what happened and was understanding, telling me that if I wanted to, I could come back after things calmed down. But I knew they wouldn't, not until I figured out who was following me and what they wanted. I stayed in my house for the next few days after I quit. I knew that guy would come back for me, and I was ready to find out who he was. It had been a month since the stranger died at my work. I was a mess. I had spent all the time sitting in the living room. I was just waiting for him to show up. It was around 1 a.m. again when I heard the knocking on the glass. I immediately turned to the back door and stared at it. Watching the shadow figure hunched over like that made me realize that maybe I was going crazy. I could have sworn that he looked almost boring. Like he had no real noticeable thing about him. My eyes just grew when I realized what was happening, when I realized who was at my back door. I walked to the door, pointing and yelling at him. It's you ... You're the man from my work. You should be dead ... Why the fuck aren't you dead? He just looked at me and I could see his brown eyes stare into my soul. I banged on the door and backed away from it. I thought I was going insane. A dead man was at my back door and I was going insane. Then I watched as a rock flew through my back door, glass shattering along the kitchen floor. I quickly grabbed a knife from a drawer and pointed it at the man. Just leave me the hell alone. I didn't do anything to you. Why won't you leave me alone? I screamed at him, but all he did was slowly make his way towards me. I didn't know what to do, so I just ran at him. I ran at him and tackled him to the ground. I could feel the decaying skin and clothes underneath me as I raised the knife above my head and brought it down into his chest as I screamed at him. I just kept stabbing and stabbing and stabbing until I could feel the knife hit the floor beneath him. I was covered in blood and dirt and filth. My hands were shaking and my heart was beating a mile a minute until I heard a bang on my front door. I turned to see it burst open and 2 police officers came in. That was about a month ago. I've been in the psych ward since the officers brought me in that night. I have explained what happened to plenty of people and none of them believe a word I say. Doesn't help that the body wasn't even there when they arrived that night. Just me covered in blood and filth and slamming a knife into the ground. Hell, they can't even figure out whose blood it was. I hear a few of the doctors and nurses say I'm probably suffering from some kind of mental insanity, but I know I'm not. I know that everything that happened was true and that I was being followed by that man I saw die a month before. I know he's not fully dead yet too, because sometimes when I sit outside in the garden of the ward, I get this strange feeling. It's as if I'm being watched. It was a perfect day at the traveling carnival. Alex, my 6-year-old son, was practically bouncing with excitement as we wandered through the fairgrounds, taking in the sights and sounds of the rides and games. His favorite moment came when we finally reached Dandy, the carnival's most beloved character. Alex ran straight into Dandy's arms, grinning ear to ear. But then something strange happened. Dandy, after posing for a quick photo, took Alex by the hand and led him toward a small tent I hadn't noticed before. It all seemed innocent at first, part of the magic, I thought, but when they slipped behind the tent's flaps and it closed, I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Alex, I called, rushing toward the tent, but no one responded. I pulled the flaps open, but the inside was empty. Panic set in as I frantically searched the carnival, asking workers, but no one seemed to know where Dandy or my son had gone. Every moment felt like an eternity. Frantic, I returned to the tent and pushed my way inside, determined to find Alex. On the other side, it wasn't the colorful carnival I had just walked through, it was something entirely different. Hidden behind the carnival's facade was a dingy, shadowy area that didn't belong. The magic of the carnival faded to cold, gray surroundings, and the festive music was replaced by an eerie silence. I started running, my footsteps echoing through the narrow paths between tents and trailers, my heart pounding in my chest. The more I searched, the stranger everything felt. I heard distant sounds like whispers and giggles, but whenever I followed, I found only emptiness, as though the carnival was shifting around me. After what felt like hours of desperate searching, I came upon a hidden area tucked behind some trailers. It didn't look like part of the carnival at all. I pushed through a door marked private, hoping beyond hope that it would lead me to Alex. What I found was more disturbing than I could have imagined. Inside, children sat in rows of chairs, their faces vacant and lifeless. Above them, strange humming machines were attached to their heads, and their expressions were frozen in a daze. And standing in front of them was Dandy, or rather, someone dressed as Dandy watching over them like a sinister guardian. A man dressed in a suit and flanked by more costumed carnival workers noticed me and approached calmly. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice cold and emotionless. "But now that you are, you deserve the truth." He explained it all, the dark secret behind the carnival. They weren't just entertaining children, they were taking them. The carnival traveled from town to town, luring children away, draining their energy and spirits, and leaving them as empty shells. It was how the carnival survived, moving on before anyone noticed the missing children. I saw Alex slumped in one of the chairs, his eyes half open, staring blankly. Rage and terror coursed through me, and without thinking, I lunged at the man in the suit. In the chaos, I managed to rip the helmet off Alex's head. His eyes flickered and he blinked, coming back to himself. "Come on, buddy, we're leaving." I scooped Alex up and ran, weaving between trailers and hiding when I heard footsteps behind us. The carnival seemed endless, but eventually we found an exit. We pushed through the crowd and into the safety of the parking lot. When I looked back, the carnival was still in full swing, none of the visitors suspecting the horror hidden within. When we got home, I tried to report what I had seen, but no one believed me. It sounded ridiculous even to me, but I knew the truth. That traveling carnival wasn't just about fun and games. And as I looked at Alex, now safe and smiling again, I realized I had almost lost him to something far darker. And I knew wherever the carnival went next, more children might not be so lucky.